Hi everyone. In this video I've decided to take a different approach to my other responses, as an initial rough audio draft ran to 30 minutes and that's just silly. So instead of cutting up Chad's video and interjecting, I felt it necessary to use a new approach. Chad's argument is:
Premise number 1, something cannot come from nothing. Premise number 2, infinite regress is illogical. Therefore, your only option is the uncreated creator.
Obviously, one objection that springs to mind is that the conclusion doesn't follow from the two premises. Should Chad be speaking of this creator as being the creator of the universe? For brevity, I shall refer to this creator as universe creator. This would make an example of a non sequitur. How is this the case? Let's expand. If we accept both these premises, and I'll discuss later why there's a good reason not to, then we are left with options other than the uncreated creator. Thus, this is not the only option as claimed. What are these options? The universe creator was produced by an uncreated creator, or the universe creator arose spontaneously via some eternal, i.e. uncreated, material process. A further point to be made depends on exactly what concept Chad refers to when he says creator. The most obvious choice, given his beliefs, is that this is the Abrahamic God, or, at the very least, a God of some description. Should this be the case, a further objection could be made. What brought the universe into being need not be a God in the slightest. Here a multitude of options are available, but I'll mention only a couple. The option that what brought the universe into being is a natural process within a nature outside of this universe opens up a range of possibilities. Here, what brought this universe into being may be the collapse of a prior universe, as some loop quantum gravity models propose, or the result of higher dimension brains colliding as posited by the ekpyrotic model in brain cosmology. Now, I've described my objection to his conclusion and outlined why I think it doesn't follow from the premises. Let's continue on to the premises themselves. Premise number 1. Something cannot come from nothing. This would seem reasonable and intuitive enough, but advancement in physics have led to some very unintuitive concepts, such as double-slit experiments with electrons, which consider particles producing interference patterns that are confined to waves. The quantum world is a strange and fascinating world indeed, and is all fairly unintuitive. It takes minds much greater than mine to begin to fully comprehend quantum mechanics. An objection to this premise comes in the form of one of the founding principles of quantum mechanics, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. This principle allows, nay demands, that particles spontaneously arise in empty space. These particles are known as virtual particles. They are responsible for magnetic fields in the form of virtual photons, for interactions between nucleons in the form of virtual piles, and for the strong nuclear force between quarks in the form of virtual gluons. We have absolutely no observational data for this idea that something cannot come from absolute nothing. So there is absolutely no reason why something can't spontaneously arise from this absolute nothing. This premise has not been proven because there's no observational data that supports it. The premise, therefore, falls foul of the logical fallacy of begging the question. It's not supported by evidence. Being fair to Chad, he preemptively attempted to counter this objection. He has 4 counter-objections. 1. The lack of direct observation of this phenomena in an entirely zero-energy environment, i.e. without a universe in place. 2. He claims that quantum events only relate to single subatomic particles of matter. Seriously, here's the clip.
The number 2 fact is quantum events relate to single subatomic particles of matter. No protons, neutrons, or electrons. They're nowhere even close to being a full atom.
3. The birth of the universe also involves the bringing into existence of space-time. 4. Virtual particles have not been shown to create anything. Let's deal with the first objection, the lack of direct observation of this phenomenon in an entirely zero-energy environment, i.e. without a universe in place. In response I say, of course, it is impossible at the present point, and for the foreseeable future, to conduct experimentation outside of this universe. As such observation of a nihilo environment has not been undertaken, and cannot at this point in time be undertaken, then this counter-objection is actually an issue for the argument itself. The first premise is unproven, as no observation has been possible. It could be the case that every 5 minutes a universe may be created in such a situation, and you've no reason to rule this out. If you rule this out, we could always rule out the first premise itself. They are both weighted equally in evidential terms. The second objection. Chad's claim that quantum events only relate to single subatomic particles of matter is simply factually inaccurate. Quantum mechanics rules the interactions between particles, be it photons interacting with electrons, or neutrons and protons inside a nucleus, or electron orbitals. For example, the Pauli exclusion principle states that no two identical fermions can occupy the same quantum state. This rules, to a large extent, the behaviour of electrons in an atom. The quantum state here is described by the quantum numbers n, l, ml and ms. Only two electrons can exist in the lowest orbital, n equals 1, as here L equals 0, ml equals 0, and ms equals half or minus a half. So electrons in the lowest orbital have the same numbers except for their spin ms, which must be half or minus a half, or their wave functions cancel out. This principle is the reason why, when you place your hand on a wall, despite most of the space in the atom being empty, you feel a nice solid surface. It's not possible for the electrons in the wall and your hand to share the same wave function, so they repel, for want of a better word, each other. This sort of repulsion is what stops the collapse of a non-fusing star core with a mass below the Chandrasekhar limit. Above this limit, electron degeneracy, which previously supported it, can no longer stop the gravitational force that pulls it in, and electrons are forced into protons in a rapid core collapse which forms a neutron star. This rapid collapse releases massive amounts of energy as a supernova. Quantum mechanics is far from limited to single subatomic particles. The third counter-objection, the birth of the universe also involving space-time, is actually a fair point. However, in certain cosmological models this is pre-existing. I get the distinct feeling, however, that the papers on this subject do account for space-time, but I'm not in the least bit an expert in this area. The fourth counter-objection, that virtual particles have never been shown to create anything. This depends on exactly what is meant by create. Is exerting a force creating? It's clearly creating a force that is being exerted on something. This becomes a bit of a game of semantics, but taking the exertion of a force as creating something, then again, this will be incorrect. For example, there's the Casimir effect, where a force is felt between two uncharged metal plates that are placed close together in a vacuum. Continuing, there's also the fact that virtual particles mediate many forces: the Coulomb force, magnetic fields, strong nuclear force, strong interaction, and so create exertions between particles. After this, he briefly mentions redshift and the cosmic microwave background radiation as not evidence for virtual particles, and yes, they are not. Who is saying that they are? Hubble expansion and the CMBR are both evidence for the Big Bang model. Before moving on to the second premise, Chad claims to have basically just killed quantum mechanics and virtual particles.
Since we basically just killed quantum physics and virtual particles.
Which is disgustingly disingenuous and appallingly dishonest. Moving on to his second premise, infinite regress is illogical. I tend to counter that, considering regress to a large extent is all we know. Why would infinite regress be illogical? As with the first premise, this would appear to beg the question. The premise is unproven. Granting this premise is true, and that there are supernatural beings, it doesn't necessarily mean that the universe creator is required to be uncreated. The universe creator may itself be a creation of a previous uncreated being, or a third, fourth or fifth generation, or thousandth, millionth or billionth generation. All these situations would avoid infinite regress. He claims that there is great evidence that the universe will have an end, and he cites heat death as an example of this. While heat death is an example of one of the possible fates of the universe, it is not a finite ending. With the universe expanding and understanding that protons decay, the universe will get more and more spread out and the nuclei in them will disintegrate. Eventually you'll reach the dark era, where only photons, neutrinos, electrons and positrons survive, rarely ever encountering each other because the universe is so spread out. From here, it's not certain what will happen. If the universe achieves thermodynamic equilibrium, then heat death occurs. This is not an end. The universe would just sit here, useless, for eternity. It's not a finite ending, and the universe may well be eternal. There's no turning back. There will just be photons that will gradually get more and more spread out, but the universe itself will still remain. Heat death is not a finite ending, it's an infinite ending. In response to the question of how this creator would avoid infinite regress itself, Chad offers this.
The response to this is fairly simple. The uncreated creator must exist outside of time, space, energy, and matter. And the evidence for this is that the universe could not have always existed.
To this I simply ask, how can it then be a personal being like the Abrahamic God? A personal deity would be one with some interaction with humans, but humans exist within the material universe and within space and time. Then how would these interactions occur? Here I'm also lost on how the universe having a beginning is evidence of this. To some extent, I would agree with this statement of outside of space, time, and energy and matter, with the caveat of within this universe. The cause of the universe may reside within something that is outside of the space and time we know within this universe, but it does not have to be entirely bereft of dimensions of space and time. The cause of the universe may well exist in some extraneous nature that exists outside of this universe. The universe may be a simulation or a creation of sentient beings within this extraneous nature, or the result of the higher dimensional brains of an extraneous nature colliding. So my objections to this have been laid forth. Not only do I feel that the conclusion does not follow from the premises, I also feel that the premises themselves are unproven, and explained why I think so. The conclusion, as the argument is presented, is a non sequitur, whose premises beg the question. I await with bated breath a calm, courteous, well-mannered and honest response from Chad. I do not, however, expect one. Thanks for watching. Take care.